At precisely 12:03:00 a.m., a palace aide rushed through the east corridor of Balmoral, carrying a sealed envelope marked "Eyes Only." Sovereign directive. King Charles Roman III was about to initiate an irreversible command. The room was still saved for his trembling hand. That night, something seismic shifted behind royal walls, and no one saw it coming. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The letter had arrived without fanfare, delivered in a discreet matte black pouch by a trusted courier who offered no explanation, only a nod. Once inside his private study, King Charles dismissed the night guard, locked the door, and sat in silence. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth it gave off couldn't thaw the chill in his bones. This wasn't just any correspondence. This was a sovereign act, one that could not be undone. With his reading glasses trembling slightly in his grip, he peeled the wax seal and read the first words aloud in a whisper. Effective immediately, precedents shall change. His eyes scanned further, and there, beneath the bold calligraphy of the order, was a name written in unmistakable clarity. Catherine, not Queen Camilla, not any past consort. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was now to stand above them all. Down the hall, senior staff were being woken without explanation, ushered into quiet briefings under heavy confidentiality. No one spoke above a murmur. The mood was thick with dread, as if the walls themselves had heard something forbidden. Everything was verbal. Trusted aides of long-standing reputations were instructed to prepare for a royal shift. No press release, no council, no discussion. This was not protocol. This was power exercised in its purest, rawest form. Within the hour, the official registry of royal precedents, locked in a secure vault under Clarence House, was requested, and its lead archivist told to prepare for immediate amendment. Catherine's title, up to now considered prestigious but traditional, was being elevated, and more shockingly, it was happening without ceremony, without Camilla's consent, and without delay. Inside the study, Charles read the order again and again. Each repetition added weight. He was not merely making a symbolic gesture. He was realigning the monarchy itself. It was a deliberate choice, not born of impulse, but forged from long-held thoughts. Sleepless nights, and perhaps a quiet reckoning with legacy. The Queen Mother had once written that the monarchy must always reflect the people's heart, and Charles, watching public adoration for Catherine rise, while whispers of discontent circled Camilla, made his decision not as a husband, but as a king. His pen hovered only briefly before signing, and in that moment, centuries of precedents were shattered. As the ink dried on Charles's private command, only one woman would soon feel the full impact, Camilla, who until now believed her place was untouchable. When Queen Camilla entered the morning briefing, she expected routine. Instead, silence. Papers were missing. Staff wouldn't meet her gaze, and a single phrase on her itinerary chilled her, no longer applicable. Her position wasn't just threatened, it had already been bypassed. Camilla had grown accustomed to the rhythm of royal mornings. For years her schedule was meticulously organized, her meetings dignified, her presence affirmed. But that morning she noticed the subtle unraveling of something once solid. Aides who used to bow quickly now hesitated. The floral arrangements, always to her liking, had been altered without notice. The portrait behind her usual seat was changed, replaced not by coincidence, but calculation, and then the whispers began. Quiet fragments overheard between corridors and passing glances. "Did you hear? It's official now." Camilla asked no questions, but her instincts screamed the answer. Something had shifted in the hierarchy, something deliberate, something final. She reached out to her longtime private secretary only to be told he had been reassigned temporarily, they claimed. The morning's briefing was vague, stripped of her usual engagements. 2 scheduled patronage visits were removed, another now attributed to the Princess of Wales. Her name, once prominently inked in royal correspondence, had begun to vanish beneath layers of silence. Even more jarring was the access revoked from her dressing room at Clarence House. Her wardrobe, ceremonial jewels, and briefing binders locked. The message wasn't subtle, it was sharp, cold, and pointed. Her authority was no longer valid. Determined to understand the scale of what was happening, Camilla made her way toward the king's quarters. The guards recognized her, but offered only rehearsed lines, no invitation, no explanation, only distance. When she finally reached the door to the study, it remained closed. She knocked once, twice, no answer. She called out his name, Charles, but the silence that followed was brutal in its clarity. He had made his decision, and whatever it was, she was not a part of it. Alone in a private drawing room, Camilla found herself gripped by a storm of memories. Her journey to the title of Queen Consort had not been without battle, public scrutiny, personal sacrifice, and relentless headlines. She had endured to reach this place, weathered the years of disapproval, and finally stood beside Charles at the coronation as an equal, or so she believed. And now, without ceremony or confrontation, that title, her victory, was being peeled away in whispers and orders written in shadows. Even the people around her were shifting. Trusted aides, who once pledged loyalty, began redirecting their gaze toward Catherine. Conversations ceased when she entered the room. Smiles were replaced with caution. Camilla wasn't just losing power. She was being erased from the picture altogether, and yet no explanation was offered. No one dared say it aloud. Because it wasn't just a demotion, it was a replacement, and the woman stepping into that void wasn't fighting for it. She wasn't pushing, she wasn't demanding. She was simply being handed the crown of influence, while Camilla's slipped quietly from her grasp. But as Camilla struggled for answers, another figure emerged, not in panic, but in solemn readiness. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had long played the quiet role, but that night her silence was replaced by quiet authority. She read it twice, her hands steady, her eyes locked on the final line, "You now stand above all others." The words did not rattle her, they didn't ignite joy or fear. Instead, they landed like something already known, something long felt but never spoken aloud. Catherine had been bred in patience, shaped by scrutiny, and tested in the furnace of royal expectation. Yet never before had she held something so absolute. The royal crest was stamped in crimson, the decree sealed with Charles's personal insignia. There was no room for interpretation. There was no signature from the Privy Council. This wasn't a recommendation. It was a command. She sat in quiet reflection, the only sound being the low tick of the mantel clock as the hour turned. The weight of the parchment was light, but the meaning was colossal. William joined her moments later, eyes weary, jaw tense. Instead, they sat in the hush of knowing a silence that carried with it the roar of change. William took her hand and whispered, "It's begun." And it had. The ceremonial sword of power had been lifted not in fanfare, but in secrecy, yet its impact would thunder through the kingdom. In the days that followed, subtle but undeniable changes began to take shape. Catherine's wardrobe appointments were quietly modified. Items labeled supporting royal were replaced with primary royal female. She was fitted for garments reserved for only the highest-ranking royal women, something no Princess of Wales had worn. While a queen consort still reigned, her stylist raised an eyebrow. Catherine said nothing. She knew now that symbols mattered more than speeches. This was the language of authority, and she had just become fluent in it. And yet, even in the quiet corridors of elevation, there was conflict. Catherine understood loyalty. She had never sought to eclipse Camilla, nor campaign for precedence, but now she was placed in the spotlight without asking for it. Her heart battled between dignity and duty. Could she bear the glare of being the face of a new monarchy? Could she endure what would come next, the resentment, the whispers, the comparisons? The answer came not in hesitation, but in resolve. She had faced enough fires to know surviving was no longer enough. She would lead, not as a rival, but as the crown's chosen symbol. The memory of the Queen Mother loomed like a guardian spirit. It was as though history itself was watching Catherine, measuring her stillness, her grace, her courage, and she did not flinch. She stood ready, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. The monarchy was shifting, and she was being asked to anchor it. While Catherine quietly prepared, the walls of the palace buzzed with unrest because not everyone was willing to accept her rise. By candle light inside the Crimson Council chamber, 5 senior royals gathered without public record. No press, no aides, only one goal, to challenge what Charles had done. And at the head of the table, Princess Anne with a storm in her eyes and a sealed letter from her father. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, just shadows and silence. This wasn't an official Privy Council meeting. This was something far older, a gathering born out of royal instinct, not protocol. Princess Anne, weathered by decades in the monarchy's trenches, held up the parchment that bore her father's handwriting. Prince Philip's sharp script etched across the page, a relic of intent. It carried no constitutional power, but its moral weight echoed louder than law. She slammed it down, her voice tight but forceful. This was never what he envisioned. Across from her, Prince Edward leaned forward, voice laced with concern, asking the question that hung like smoke. Does Charles even realize what he set in motion? They all knew the truth. King Charles had acted unilaterally. No debate, no consultation, a midnight order that restructured the monarchy's hierarchy with a single stroke. Catherine, a royal by marriage, had just leapfrogged every living consort, including the Queen. It was unthinkable to some, revolutionary to others, and deeply threatening to all those whose positions relied on tradition. Around the table, legal advisers and senior courtiers whispered about the ancient but rarely invoked Consort President's Act, a legislative ghost last amended under George V. If Charles's command stood, it could dismantle the very spine of ceremonial order, and that, for those in the room, wasn't just a political risk. It was a royal heresy. Beatrice and Eugenie were conspicuously absent. Whether by design or exclusion, the younger generation remained in the dark, their names missing from the discussion. That silence spoke volumes. Their marginalization was strategic, a quiet acknowledgement that royal survival would not include every bloodline, and that made the debate even more volatile. If Catherine was to rise unchallenged, whose lineage would be sacrificed, what doors would close permanently to others? And who would be left to carry royal burden without title or access? Anne, sharp-eyed and unmoved, demanded clarity. "Is this about legacy or loyalty?" she asked. No one had a clean answer, not even the advisers tasked with maintaining the illusion of certainty. Some argued that Charles was safeguarding the future, that Catherine had become the monarchy's anchor in a turbulent era. But others saw it differently, that this move was personal, that it was about rewriting the sins of the past and ensuring a future that favored the Wales family above all others. In the soft murmur of the chamber, one question cracked like thunder: if Catherine rises, who else falls? The room fell into a pause, long, tense, suffocating. No one wanted to say it, but the implication was clear. This decree didn't just elevate one woman, it redrew the monarchy's map. And while the walls of Windsor may have seemed unmoved, within this chamber, history was being fought for in whispers and warnings. And while the council plotted in secret, Charles faced a battle within his own heart, a war between duty and dynasty. Alone in the royal chapel, Charles knelt beneath the stained glass depiction of King George VI. His voice was nearly a whisper. "Forgive me, but this ends tonight." The monarch wasn't acting out of rage, but revelation. He had made a choice for the future, not the past. There, in the quiet sanctuary, where generations had prayed before war, coronation, and death, Charles allowed himself what the crown rarely permitted: solitude. And in that solitude, memory surged like a tide. He thought not of sovereigns or scepters, but of women. Not just the women history had placed at his side, but the ones who shaped the public's heart and the palace's direction. The past hovered heavy. Camilla, whose path to the throne was paved in defiance, and Diana, whose absence remained louder than any living voice. The conflict was not new. It had haunted his reign since the first day. But now, as the monarchy strained under modern scrutiny, Charles felt something deeper than duty. He felt clarity. He reached inside the hidden drawer beneath the chapel's old lectern, where a collection of sealed documents had remained untouched since his mother's final days. Among them was a handwritten note from Queen Elizabeth Roman II, dated 6 months before her death. In it, she described Catherine as a woman of uncommon grace, unwavering discretion, and a symbol of the monarchy's next breath. She urged Charles not to look backward for tradition, but forward for continuity. The words struck him harder than any political counsel ever could. His mother had left behind more than legacy. She'd left instruction, and for the first time, Charles understood what that truly meant. His mind returned to Diana, not as an accusation, but as a wound still tender. Her face in the press, her voice in the halls, her tragedy etched into the DNA of the crown. The guilt Charles carried wasn't just personal, it was institutional, and in Catherine he saw something redemptive. Not a replacement, but a bridge, a way to honor the past without being shackled by it. That understanding didn't erase his loyalty to Camilla, but it did redefine it. Her crowning had been a compromise, an acceptance of reality, but this moment, this decision was not about compromise. It was about restoration. He remembered the day of his coronation, the heavy robes, the muted applause, the subtle protests, and the look on Camilla's face, equal parts triumph and tension. Even then, he knew the public had tolerated, not embraced, and that tolerance was fading. He had hoped time would smooth the edge, but the public had moved on without permission. They had chosen their queen, and it wasn't the one beside him on the throne. It was the one standing silently in the background, weathering storm after storm, never demanding the crown, but quietly earning it. Charles turned to the royal chaplain with eyes that had finally stopped searching. He spoke of safeguarding the monarchy, of ensuring that what survived his reign wasn't more controversy, but stability, trust, continuity. He spoke not as a husband, nor as a father, but as a king, and with that he finalized the transition. The private decree would now be made public. The papers were signed, the gears were set, the formal order was drafted and sealed for release. The crown was not shifting, but its center of gravity was. But even as Charles wrestled with ghosts, the living stormed forward, and the royal battlefield was about to erupt. Camilla stormed into the Windsor reception room unannounced. Catherine stood at the window, calm. "What did you do?" Camilla demanded. But Catherine didn't raise her voice. She only lifted the scroll Charles had given her, and the crest above her name told Camilla everything. The silence between them was immediate, thick with betrayal and the ache of inevitability. For Camilla, this wasn't just a moment of confusion. It was a violent rupture. Everything she had clawed toward, defended and protected, was crumbling in real time, and the very woman who stood before her, poised and unreadable, was holding the knife. Her voice cracked as she repeated the question, "What did you do?" But there was no answer waiting to comfort her. Catherine simply handed over the scroll, the ink still fresh, the wording clear, the implications irreversible. At the top, the words by command of His Majesty, and at the bottom, to be enacted without delay. Camilla's hands shook as she scanned the letter. She looked up, searching for any sign of hesitation in Catherine's face, but there was none. The Princess of Wales didn't gloat, didn't blink. Her stillness spoke volumes. The power had not been seized, it had been bestowed, and that made it worse. Camilla's voice rose, trembling with wounded fury, accusing Catherine of plotting, of waiting in the wings to take what had never truly belonged to her. She invoked years of sacrifice, loyalty, and the relentless judgment she had endured to wear the crown. But Catherine interrupted her with only one line, uttered without venom. "This is for the future of the crown." The words hit like a strike to the chest. This wasn't a personal vendetta, it was something deeper. Something sanctioned, and that truth left Camilla with nothing to grip onto. Emotion broke through. Her eyes welled not with weakness, but with the grief of being discarded. She stepped back, scanned the room, and reached for the porcelain vase on the side table, a wedding gift from a foreign dignitary. With a sudden swing, it shattered against the marble floor. The crash echoed, a fitting requiem for her diminishing reign. Outside the door, palace aides flinched, but none dared enter. Inside, the symbolism was deafening. It wasn't about the vase. It was about power and the sound of it breaking. The confrontation fizzled into a hollow quiet. Camilla's shoulders sank, her anger drained, replaced by something colder. Acceptance, perhaps. Catherine remained still. No gloating, no pity, just resolve. The moment had passed, and nothing either of them said would undo it. What had begun in whispers behind locked doors was now written in royal decree. And in that room, for the first time, Camilla understood she had become a relic of a chapter now closed. As the confrontation ended in silence, the eyes of the nation began to turn, and a royal announcement was only moments away. On every major network, the royal seal appeared unexpectedly, then the voice of Charles Roman III. "Tonight I speak not just as your king, but as a father and as a steward of this nation's legacy." The words that followed rewrote royal history in real time. The statement had not been scheduled. No reporters were notified. The royal press corps, seasoned and cynical, found themselves scrambling as the palace signaled an emergency broadcast from Buckingham. There were no leaks, no whispers, no anonymous tips. Just the unmistakable voice of a monarch who had waited decades to speak without filter, now doing so at a time of calculated silence. He looked straight into the camera, the weight of history resting on every syllable. Then came the words that froze the kingdom in place. As of this moment, by private decree and forthcoming formal declaration, the Princess of Wales shall hold precedence above all consorts, current or former. There was no room for interpretation. It was official, irreversible, and perhaps most shockingly, undeniably personal. Charles spoke not as a man cornered by politics, but as one motivated by conviction. He framed the decision as essential to national unity, a pivot towards stability and a necessary evolution for the monarchy to endure the next century. "We must look not only to tradition," he said, "but to trust, and where the people place their trust, so too must we." It was both a declaration and a challenge to the institution, to his family, to history itself. For the royal household, it was a seismic moment. Camilla was publicly acknowledged for her dedicated years of unwavering support, but her title was carefully redefined. She would remain Queen Consort in title, yet stripped of ceremonial authority and displaced in precedence. A repositioning masked in gratitude, but clear in implication. She had been moved to the sidelines gracefully, yes, but unmistakably. It was a royal thank you and goodbye. Then, as if sealing the future with words alone, Charles continued, "Let it be known that the Princess of Wales shall henceforth bear the designation of future regent consort, entrusted with crown's representation in times ahead." The phrase was historic. No consort had ever been pre-decided as regent. The move not only elevated Catherine's role, it enshrined her within the future of the monarchy with unprecedented clarity. She was no longer just the wife of a future king. She was the monarchy's anchor, officially recognized and publicly affirmed. Across the nation, reactions poured in like thunderclaps, some in awe, some in outrage, others frozen in disbelief. Supporters hailed the decision as visionary, long overdue. Critics called it destabilizing, even cruel. But regardless of sentiment, the magnitude was undeniable. The king had drawn a line in the sand. One era had ended and another had just begun, not in slow evolution, but in a single irreversible sentence. The world reacted in awe, shock, and speculation. But behind palace walls, one final act remained, one that would seal the shift permanently. At dusk inside the Chapel Royal, an unexpected scene unfolded. Catherine stood alone as ceremonial officials rehearsed a coronation blessing, one that had never before been prepared for a Princess of Wales. No cameras, no announcements, just a crown and a future quietly rehearsed. It was not a coronation, but something far more symbolic, an intimate rehearsal of what the monarchy now considered inevitable. In that hushed chamber, tradition met transformation. Catherine, already burdened by the storm surrounding her rise, was now stepping into a sacred silence where rituals whispered of what was to come. Before her, the royal scepter, brooch, and crest were laid in careful alignment, symbols not of current power, but of destined sovereignty. There was no choir, no public, no press, only the murmurs of centuries-old rites echoing through a space now witnessing something entirely new. A princess of Wales preparing to receive what only queens before her had held. The scroll bearing Charles's seal rested beside the altar, its message more emotional than formal. In the king's own hand it read, "The people will follow where grace leads." That one sentence, spoken in voice-over during the quiet rehearsal, would later become etched in royal memory. It was a blessing, a benediction, a declaration that Catherine had not just inherited favor, she had earned it. Yet the gravity of that moment was not lost on her, for behind the elegance lay a kingdom divided, a family bruised, and a future still uncertain. From the rear pew, unnoticed by most, stood Prince George. His eyes never left his mother. Though just a child, he seemed to understand the enormity of what was unfolding. That he was witnessing a rehearsal not only for her reign, but for the legacy she was forging for him. In that moment, lineage became something more than blood. It became belief. George wasn't simply watching history. He was absorbing purpose, watching the quiet strength that would one day define his own crown. As Catherine stood before the ancient relics, a shaft of amber light broke across the stone floor, illuminating her like a divine affirmation. She did not bow, she did not speak. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply as if inhaling centuries, exhaling uncertainty. Then, without hesitation, she stepped forward, one small movement, yet one that echoed through the deepest corridors of royal history. In that instant there was no doubt. She had accepted what was being asked of her, not as a privilege, but as a calling. But just when it seemed the tide had turned, a single royal shadow remained, and their next move could shift everything once more. A letter arrived at Clarence House bearing a California postmark and the unmistakable seal of the Duke of Sussex. Inside, a single sentence, "This is not the monarchy our mother envisioned." The ripple of Charles's announcement had barely settled when the tremor from across the Atlantic struck. Prince Harry, distant in geography, but tethered still by blood, had been caught off guard. There was no warning, no pre-briefing, no courtesy call. He had learned of the royal restructuring like the rest of the world through television and headlines, the elevation of Catherine, the sidelining of Camilla, and the crowning language of future regent consort. None of it had been discussed with him. The message was unmistakable. This new royal path had no room for the Sussexes, and it burned deeply. In Montecito, the fallout was immediate. Meghan, who had long felt the sting of exclusion, reportedly reacted with unfiltered fury. The omission of Archie and Lyatt from any royal mention, even in symbolic gestures of future lineage, was seen not as oversight, but deliberate erasure. To her, this was confirmation of what she had feared all along, that the crown's reinvention did not include their branch of the family tree. But it was Harry's reaction that spoke louder. His letter, short and sharp, was not written in anger. It was written in defiance. That single line was not a cry for attention, but a warning flare fired back at the monarchy that once promised unity and now delivered division. Tensions once buried under oceans of distance and silence surged to the surface again. William and Harry, already estranged, now found themselves on opposing ends of a monarchy that was evolving without consensus. Privately, William defended the decision. He believed in the necessity of streamlining the crown's focus. But Harry saw it differently. He saw manipulation, he saw revision, and more than anything, he saw a betrayal of their mother's belief in fairness. The ghost of Diana, once a unifier in public memory, now hovered as a fracture line behind palace walls. Whispers began to grow into tremors. Could the decree be challenged? Was there precedent for such a unilateral act from the king without wider royal council? Legal experts quietly began analyzing centuries-old succession documents, digging through royal archives for loopholes or leverage. A soft rebellion was forming, not just in Harry's mind, but in the legal shadows of royal law. It wasn't a revolution yet, but it was no longer silence. The crown had drawn a line in gold, and Harry had answered in ink. As Catherine stepped into the light of a future shaped for her, the shadows around her grew longer. The monarchy had always survived on the illusion of unity. That illusion had just been shattered. With a single sentence from California, what looked like the conclusion became the prologue to something more dangerous, more personal. The War of the Windsor wasn't over. It was awakening, and so, with one royal order, the monarchy shifted. But with one royal objection, the battle for the crown's future may have only just begun. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next